absolutely beautiful. And I don't think we could have planned it better, because I actually want to focus on the wider side of the shofar. And I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you to think about something for a minute. And if you want, you can hit the reaction button and raise your hand if you feel like it. How many of us, put yourself in a Rosh Hashanah mindset, you're listening to the shofar. How many of us, when we hear the shofar, hear crying? How many of us, when we hear the shofar, we hear an alarm, like a wake up? How many of us, when we hear shofar, do we think about Akedat Yitzchak? How many of us, when we hear the shofar, do we think about revelation, like at Sinai, or a future redemption? How many of us think about coronating God as sovereign over the universe? Now, let me ask you a question. If you're sitting in one seat and you're thinking about one of those themes, and someone else is sitting in another seat and they're thinking of a completely other theme, maybe even opposing themes, right? The crying and the clarion call. Are you doing the same thing? The public nature of shofar is actually deeply ambiguous, and it's deeply multiple. We're doing one activity. It has no words to it except the words we put around it. But the actual ritual itself has no words to it. You wouldn't be able to listen to it on its own and know what it means. And in fact, you could even think of it as a musical instrument. And I like to argue that it's precisely because shofar has so many different interpretations that can exist side by side in our own heads as we sit next to each other or stand next to each other in shul, that it is the perfect example of a ritual. It does precisely what ritual is supposed to do. What ritual in many ways is supposed to do is provide a focal point for people to share in relationships. And I'll tell you a little bit more. There's a wonderful sociologist named Adam Seligman, and he suggests that there are two types of self. There's the sincere self, which is what you're thinking, what you're feeling right now. So maybe you're feeling tired, maybe you're feeling hungry, maybe you're feeling happy, maybe you're thinking about something that you need to do after you get off this call. But then there's the ritual self, which is the performance that you're doing. Now, if I look on this screen, you're all doing the same thing, ostensibly. Your performance, what you're doing on the outside, is the same. You're looking at a screen, you're taking notes, you're thinking, you're learning, but I have no idea what's going on in your sincere self. The ritual, the performance of coming together and doing this together creates an ability to share this space without having to know how Elisheva in particular feels about this moment, or without having to know what Jordana in particular thinks is going on. It's actually dafka, an ambiguous space. And the reason we can all show up here is because we each are allowed to have our own interpretation of the space, even as it is shared with everyone else. I want to give one more example of how this works, let's say in relationship. In general, if you try to maintain a relationship with anyone or with any institution only based on sincerity, on how you feel, that would fail, right? Try living with someone and never offering to do the laundry, never offering to wash the dishes, never offering to take out the garbage, right? Try going to work only when you feel like it, right? There's actually the way that relationships are maintained, whether it's relationships between people and God or relationships between people and each other, are not just on the basis of sincerity, what am I feeling right now, but they're on the basis of shared activities, actually shared activities. And I think that the shofar represents this beautifully. You can say, I love you to someone when you don't really feel it, but you know you need to say it because that's what's going to maintain the relationship. That's the ritual self. That's a performance. You're doing a performance that allows the two of you to be together. You can also say, I love you when you really feel it in your own sincere way. And that's when you wait to say, I love you, right? The shofar is the quintessential ritual stuff. And I want to give you an example of how I think the Gemara itself in Rosh Hashanah, I'm already a few masachtot ahead apparently, how the Gemara itself actually tests the limits of how much of an action shofar is versus how much shofar is each one of us being able to say, this is what I think about God being sovereign over the universe right now. This is what I think about my need to do tshuva. This is what, right? The fact that it's, even when it's a cacophony of shofar, by the way, even if you wanted to have everybody blow their own shofar, it doesn't matter. The sound is the same. The sound is the same, but the meanings are so, so different. So I want to call your attention to a moment in Rosh Hashanah that you'll surely remember. And for those who learn brachot, you'll also remember a different shade of this conversation, which is the Gemara is talking about whether mitzvot require kavanah, whether mitzvot require intention. Now, what kind of question is that? Of course, mitzvot require intention. Isn't the whole point that you're developing your relationship with Hashem, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others? What is that question even? So I want to think about these two selves, the self that actually will do something with others where there's a lot of interpretive possibility, but it retains the relationship, maybe because you don't always express the differences of your interpretation, maybe because you always do it even when you're not exactly feeling it, but it's the action itself that does something. I want to think about how that actually speaks to the Gemara's discussion of whether mitzvot require kavanah, and specifically shofar. I'm going to share my screen for a minute, and I'm cognizant of time, so we'll make sure to do this in all the right amount of time. For anybody who's interested in the Adam Seligman, we'll have that available for you another time, but I want to look at our Gemara right now, okay? The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Kafchet Amud Aleph to Kafchet Amud Bet, goes like this. Shalchu le'avua de Shmuel. They sent the message to Shmuel's father, Kvo v'achal matzah yatza. If somebody forced you to eat matzah, I know some of us feel like we're always forced to eat matzah, but if somebody forced you to eat matzah, you were yotze your mitzvah. You achieved the mitzvah. Kvo man, who forced them? Ilema kvo shade, if you say that a demon forced them, meaning some sort of like internal force. V'hatanya, don't we learn? Itim chalim, itim shote, kishu chalim hareo kibikeach l'chol dvarav, kishu shote hareo kishote l'chol dvarav. If this person was sort of like felt compelled because they were having a manic episode, well, that doesn't count as eating matzah. Don't we learn that somebody who's sometimes lucid, sometimes has the status of a shota, there's something going on there mentally that's not working right, that if they're having an episode, that doesn't actually count. So it can't be that they were forced by some internal, episode. So Amar Rav Ashi says, shekfa'u parsim. Parsim, some people say it means Persian, some people say other things, but somebody forced you to eat matzah. So here you are, you're not thinking, I want to eat matzah. This is my sincere remembrance of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and I'm thinking about all the people who came out. You're literally just being forced to eat matzah. You put it in your mouth. You're Yotze. You fulfilled your mitzvah. Amar Rava says, well, you know what I think then? Hatokei l'shir yatza. Then if you're just blowing a shofar to make music, you should also be Yotze, because after all, it's just an action. You're just doing an action. Pshita hainuha, aren't they the same thing? Ma'u detema, what would we have thought? Hatam echol matzah amar Rachmana. The Torah just said, eat matzah. And you ate it, whether you were forced or you weren't forced, but you did it. Aval hacha, but here, when it comes to shofar, zichron truat ktiv, it says you have to remember. It's a remembrance, some mental energy, some, emotional investment, right? Cognitive investment, even. It's a remembrance of a blast. Ktiv, it said, v'hai mitasik ba'almahu. This person's just fiddling around with a shofar. So kamash malan. This is coming to teach us, no, you could eat matzah, being forced and be yotze, and you could blow shofar just for music and be yotze. Alma kasavar Rava, mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana. Sounds like Rava doesn't think you need kavana for mitzvot. You don't need intention. It's okay if you're playing for music and that counts as shofar. It's okay if you're eating because somebody forced something into your mouth and that counts for matzah. So Eitive, but wait a second. We have another source, which those who learn brachot will remember this Mishnah. Haya koreh b'Torah v'yigi azman hamikra. If somebody was reading in the Torah, you happen to be somewhere near Parshat Ve'et Hanan, and Kriyat Shema, time for Kriyat Shema comes. Im kivein libo, if that person had intention, yatsa, they can fulfill the mitzvah of Shema by just reading it there. V'im lav, and if not, lo yatsa, you don't fulfill. So doesn't that sound like you need kavanah? You need intention? My love, kivein libo latze, aren't we saying you need intention in order to fulfill the mitzvah? Like, meaning you need intention. I am here intending to fulfill a mitzvah, right? You need that. It's not just, no, that's not the kind of intention you need. Likrot, you just need intention to read, to actually know that you're reading. Likrot, to read. Bakakari, but you are reading. The Korela Hagia, you were reading to fix the Torah scroll, and now you're really going to read and enunciate all the words, right? I want to even just pause here. This conversation, that you look at shofar, and what do you see? You could see shofar as you're just playing an instrument, just like you could see matzah as you're just downing some food. You could see even Kriyat Shema as you're just reading from a scroll, right? What the rabbis are asking is they're saying, well, if these things, if the action, if the ritual is really what's central, then why do we even need to be thinking about this as a mitzvah at all? Why not just say, as long as you did the action, it's fine. And what I'd like to end with is this bridge that we can imagine in our heads. There are actions that we do all the time without thinking about it. There are actions that we do that we are very, very meticulous about why we're doing this. Shofar is actually a third space because it's not just about me and what I'm doing. It's about we. I'm in shul on Rosh Hashanah, or by the way, to Rabbanit Farber's point on the last Amud, I'm in the fields and don't even hear the Shaliach Tzibor, right? But I'm thinking about how I relate to the bigger picture. And if that bigger picture is going to include me, it has to be ambiguous enough. It has to be open enough that Rachel could be thinking one thing and Yael could be thinking another thing and Madeline could be thinking another thing. And we're still all there as part of the same activity. It is something that is so lost in our Western culture today, where we all think it needs to be what I think, when I think, and only with the people who think like me. And yet there's a limit because it still needs to be in the context of a mitzvah, right? At the end, we actually do think that mitzvot require kavanah. It can't just be, well, someone's doing a performance and I'm thinking about this as a jazz performance and I'm thinking about this as, coronating God, sovereign of the universe. We don't go that far, right? But the question that Chazal even raise, could you go that far, focuses us on the importance of an action in order to connect. You come on this screen today, you could do the Siyum by yourself. You could listen to Rabbanit Farber because you want to be something bigger than yourselves. I go and hear Shofar and Shul because I want to be part of something bigger. And whether that part of something bigger is a relationship with God, regardless of how I'm feeling at that moment, or that something bigger is a relationship with others, or both, there's something about the public nature of Shofar and the fact that it has both the narrow end and the wide end that I hope will carry us through as we continue to learn in community.